At 68 years old, Henry had always lived a life defined by structure and quiet resilience. A retired school principal in a small coastal town in Oregon, Henry had spent decades putting others before himself, raising two children as a single father after his wife's passing, mentoring students, and quietly bearing the weight of responsibility. His days were filled with routine, morning walks to the local bakery, volunteering at the library, and Sunday dinners with his adult children. Yet beneath the rhythm of stability, there was an ache, a longing for connection that friendship alone couldn't satisfy. That's when Amelia entered his life. She was everything Henry hadn't realized he was missing. Vibrant, sharp-witted, with a free spirit that breathed color into his grayscale world. Their first encounter was at a community art exhibit, where her laugh carried across the room like music. She made him feel young again, seen. For the first time in years, Henry found himself imagining a new chapter. Not one of quiet reflection, but of possibility. But while his heart opened to love once more, those closest to him weren't so sure. And as Henry would soon learn, some chapters start with light but end in shadows. This video is a must-watch for all seniors and their families. What happens when trust is betrayed and identity is blurred? If you can relate, press 1. Despite the warnings from his children and longtime friend Matthew, Henry couldn't help but fall deeper into the orbit of Amelia's radiant charm. Every moment with her felt like stepping into a forgotten dream. The kind where laughter flowed freely, hands touched like promises, and the world outside ceased to matter. Amelia had this way of looking at Henry as if she saw beyond the gray in his beard or the weariness in his posture. With her, he felt not just alive, but important. Their early days together were filled with spontaneity. She took him to local jazz nights, dragged him into vibrant art galleries, and even convinced him to join her for salsa dancing classes on Tuesday nights. "You're not old," she'd whisper with a mischievous grin. "You're just waiting to be rediscovered." And Henry believed her. For the first time in years, he swapped his beige cardigans for colorful shirts, swapped evenings alone for twilight walks, holding Amelia's hand, and replaced silence with songs they hummed in the car on the way to nowhere. But not everyone was celebrating this new chapter. "Dad, are you sure this is real?" his daughter Emily asked over dinner one night, worry softening her voice. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not at this stage in life." "I'm not trying to prove anything," Henry replied, his voice steady but defensive. I want to feel something again." Matthew, his closest friend since college, wasn't so gentle. "She's got a spark, sure, but I've seen people get burned chasing sparks before." Still, Henry brushed off the concern. After all, hadn't he earned this? A chance to live, to love, to take a risk? What he didn't notice, not at first, was how subtly things began to shift. It started small, a comment about his old jacket being outdated, then a suggestion to try a different cologne, a gentle push to skip his usual Thursday coffee with Matthew and join her at a wellness retreat instead. "It's just a shirt," he told himself. "It's just one missed coffee." But the changes kept coming. The things Henry used to love, his morning paper, weekend fishing trips, even his quiet time reading, slowly began to fade, replaced piece by piece by Amelia's preferences. And Henry let it happen. Why wouldn't he? Her joy lit up his world, and in every smile she gave him, he felt rewarded, seen, validated. But deep down in the quiet moments when Amelia wasn't around and the noise had settled, a flicker of doubt began to rise. Was he changing for the better? Or was he simply disappearing into someone else's idea of love? What began as a revival of life was slowly, invisibly becoming a surrender of self. The transformation wasn't sudden. It crept in like a slow fog. At first, Henry thought he was simply evolving, adapting to a new relationship, compromising like any loving partner would. But before he realized it, compromise turned into compliance. And love, once so warm and life-giving, became a quiet storm chipping away at who he was. It was during a weekend retreat in Ashland, a picturesque inn nestled near the mountains, when the shift became undeniable. Amelia had booked the trip, calling it a reset for them both. But from the moment they arrived, Henry felt the tension. He wore a flannel shirt he'd always loved, faded, comfortable, with memories stitched into every thread. Amelia eyed it with disapproval. "Why do you insist on dressing like a grandfather from a Hallmark movie?" she said, not joking. The laughter didn't follow. Henry smiled, trying to laugh it off, but the sting was real. That evening, at dinner with a group of Amelia's younger friends, the comments became more pointed. "You could be a silver fox if you just trim that beard and drop a few pounds," one woman teased, nudging Amelia. Amelia chuckled. "Trust me, I've been working on it." The table laughed. Henry didn't. He smiled out of habit, the same way he did when students would insult him behind his back during his teaching years. But inside, something cracked. That wasn't a partner defending his dignity. That was a partner publicly chiseling away at it. Back in the room, Henry stayed quiet, staring out the window at the darkening hills. Amelia wrapped her arms around him. "Don't be so sensitive," she whispered. "It's just banter." But it didn't feel like banter. It felt like erosion. In the weeks that followed, things only escalated. Amelia began to suggest changes as if they were necessities. "You really shouldn't eat that," she'd say when he reached for dessert. "You'd look better in fitted pants," she'd add at the store, tossing aside his go-to khakis. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror adjusting her makeup. "Why don't you ever try harder with your appearance?" she asked, not cruelly, but with an edge of frustration. Henry's chest tightened. He didn't argue. He rarely did. Instead, he started second-guessing everything. What he wore, what he said, how he walked. Even his laugh felt too loud now, too outdated. He caught himself mimicking the younger men Amelia seemed to admire. He bought a new coat, changed his cologne, skipped his morning pastries, and still, it never felt like enough. He was constantly adjusting, bending, shrinking, hoping to earn that bright spark in her eyes again. But it had faded, and with it, so had he. He looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the man staring back. He wasn't Henry anymore. He was a version, polished, altered, but hollow. The man who had once stood tall with wisdom and quiet pride was now hunched beneath the weight of expectations that were never truly his to carry. One rainy Thursday evening, everything changed. Not with shouting or slammed doors, but in the silence afterward. Henry had hosted a small dinner at his house. A modest evening with just Amelia and a couple of her acquaintances. He'd cooked, cleaned, even set the table with the good china he rarely used. He wanted it to be perfect. It wasn't. "The food was too bland," Amelia commented. "The ambiance was a little dated." And when he attempted a story about his travels in his younger days, one of the guests smirked. "You really are from another era, huh?" Amelia didn't defend him. She just gave a tight smile and changed the subject. Later that night, after the guests had left and the dishes were stacked high in the sink, she sighed. You could have made a better impression, you know. Henry froze. That was the moment. The moment something inside him shifted. He didn't reply. He didn't argue. He simply sat down in the living room, staring into the dim lamplight while Amelia brushed her hair upstairs. Around him, the house, once a space of comfort, felt like someone else's home. The walls were lined with artwork she liked. The furniture had been rearranged to suit her taste. Even the bookshelf, once filled with his favorite biographies, now held decorative vases and books she never read. It hit him. He was a guest in his own life. His eyes wandered to an old photo on the mantel, a black and white shot of him on his retirement day. He was laughing, surrounded by colleagues. Back then, his eyes were bright, his posture proud, his smile genuine. The man in the picture had known who he was. Where had that man gone? Henry slowly stood and walked toward the mirror across the hallway. He hadn't really looked at himself in a long time. Not just glancing, but truly looking. The reflection that met him was tired, thinner, smaller. But it wasn't just the age or the lines on his face. It was the weariness in his spirit. He whispered to his reflection, "When did I become invisible to myself?" He thought about all the times he'd bit his tongue, all the hobbies he'd abandoned, the friends he stopped seeing, the mornings he skipped his favorite pastry because of Amelia's comments. He had traded peace for approval, identity for affection, freedom for fear of being alone again. He sank into the couch and felt the weight of years. Not just his age, but the emotional burden he had carried silently. But for the first time in months, a strange clarity settled in. This wasn't love, at least not the kind that nourishes and uplifts. It was performance, pressure, and quiet pain. And Henry, the real Henry, was still in there, somewhere. He just had to find his way back. And that realization was the first step. The next morning, the sky was unusually clear for a February day. The rain had washed everything clean. The streets, the sidewalks, and in some strange way, Henry's heart too. He sat with a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, just the way he used to like it before he changed it to match Amelia's taste. He listened to the silence in his home, but this time it didn't feel hollow. It felt like space. Space to breathe, space to think. Henry picked up the phone and dialed Amelia's number. "Can we meet today?" he asked, voice steady. They met at a cafe nestled between a florist and a used bookstore. The same place where they'd once shared long afternoons and laughter over lemon scones. But today it felt different. The warmth was gone. The air held something final. Amelia looked up from her phone. "What's going on?" Henry didn't flinch. He didn't shuffle nervously. He simply looked at her and said, "I need to talk. And I need you to just listen." She blinked, surprised by the firmness in his tone. "I've tried, Amelia," he said softly. "I've really tried to be the man you wanted. I changed what I wore, what I ate, how I spoke, even how I spent my time. But somewhere in the middle of all that, I lost myself. I don't know who I am when I'm with you anymore. And I miss that man." Her brows furrowed. "Henry, this feels dramatic. Relationships require give and take." "Yes," he nodded, "but this one has only taken." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I love you, or at least I thought I did. But loving you has meant forgetting me. And I can't keep doing that. I won't." She scoffed. "So what? You're just walking away?" "No," Henry said, a calm strength in his voice. "I'm walking toward myself." He stood, pushed his chair back, and without another word, walked out the door. For the first time in years, Henry felt something powerful surge through him. Relief. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. The days that followed were quiet, yes, but not lonely. He returned to his morning walks along the shoreline, the ones he had given up because Amelia wasn't a morning person. He pulled his old leather jacket from the back of the closet and wore it proudly, despite the scuffs. He called Matthew and invited him for coffee, where they sat and talked for hours like old times. No pressure, no judgments, just two old friends reconnecting. He dusted off his record player and played the jazz albums he loved. He painted again. Not masterpieces, but memories. And with each day, Henry's reflection began to look a little more familiar. He hadn't just ended a relationship. He had opened a door back to himself. The weeks that followed felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a house he'd lived in for years but never truly seen. Henry had always believed that love was the final chapter, something you hold on to when the world slows down and the years begin to count backward. But now he saw love differently. It wasn't about clinging, it was about understanding. And sometimes understanding meant letting go. At first, the quiet was unsettling. The absence of Amelia's constant texts, her music echoing from his speakers, her perfume lingering in the air. It all haunted him. He missed her. Or maybe he just missed the idea of her, the hope she had once given him. But every time that longing stirred, he reminded himself of the man he used to be. Confident, whole, content. So he began to rebuild. One morning, Henry found his old easel tucked behind the furnace in the basement. Covered in dust, paint crusted on the edges, it was a relic of who he'd once been. He pulled it out, set it by the sunroom window, and began to paint. Not for anyone else, just for him. He called his daughter Emily and invited her over. They cooked together, his recipe, his way. They laughed over silly stories from her childhood, and for the first time in a long time, she looked at him, not with worry, but admiration. "You seem lighter, Dad," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I think I am," he replied, smiling gently. Henry didn't stop there. He joined a local walking group for older adults, most of whom had stories of their own. Widows, widowers, divorcees, and those rediscovering themselves after decades of marriage. Every morning they walked along the coast, talked about life, traded book recommendations, and laughed like teenagers. It was simple. It was healing. He even signed up for a creative writing class at the community center. At first, his stories were clunky, hesitant, unsure. But as the weeks passed, his voice began to emerge. One story, in particular, was about a man who forgets who he is to please someone else and rediscovers himself through silence. His classmates applauded. One woman teared up. "You wrote my life," she whispered. Henry realized then that he wasn't alone in this journey. So many had given up pieces of themselves for love that never gave back. But reclaiming those pieces, even if slowly, was possible. He still thought of Amelia sometimes, not with anger, but with gratitude. Their time together had taught him what he needed to learn, that compromise shouldn't mean erasure, that love without respect isn't love at all, and that peace isn't found in someone else's arms. It's found within. Henry no longer feared being alone. He had come to love the sound of his own footsteps, the rhythm of his own breath, in the quiet strength of his own heart. He hadn't just healed. He had come home to himself. Autumn had arrived, painting the trees in Henry's town with fiery shades of gold, amber, and crimson. The crisp morning air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. It was the kind of season that whispered of change, not the loud, sudden kind, but the quiet transformation that creeps in slowly, like healing. One Saturday morning, Henry stood at the edge of Mirror Lake, wrapped in his favorite flannel coat, the one Amelia had once mocked. The still water reflected the sky like glass, and in it he saw not just his face, but his story. He had lived through heartbreak, not the dramatic, novel-worthy kind, but the slow erosion of self that comes when you pour into someone who only takes. And yet here he was, standing, breathing, healing, and thriving. The man who had once sought validation in another's gaze had learned to find it in his own reflection. The man who once feared solitude now cherished it as a sacred companion. He had discovered that peace wasn't something given, it was chosen. And love was still beautiful, still worth hoping for, but never again at the cost of his own identity. As he walked around the lake path, he greeted familiar faces from his walking group. One of them, a woman named Grace, walked beside him, matching his pace. She was warm, gentle, and had a quiet wisdom in her smile. Their conversations were easy. No performance, no pressure, just presence. Grace didn't try to change him. She didn't comment on his clothes or suggest he lose weight. She simply asked how he was sleeping, what book he was reading, what color he planned to paint next. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was respect. And for Henry, that meant everything. Later that afternoon, he returned home and stood in his small art studio, gazing at the latest canvas, a self-portrait, not exact, not realistic, but full of color and movement. It was messy, bold, and unfinished, just like him. Henry smiled. He thought about all the people out there, still trying to be enough for someone who never truly saw them. He thought about those who, like him, feared starting over, and he wished he could sit beside each of them, pour them a cup of coffee and say, "You haven't missed your chance. You haven't run out of time. You are still here, and that means your story isn't over." Because the truth is, it's never too late to come back to yourself. And as the sun dipped behind the hills and bathed his home in golden light, Henry stood in the glow of a life rebuilt, not around someone else, but around his own soul. He had loved, he had lost, but more importantly, he had returned to himself. And that, he realized, was the greatest love story of all. Henry's journey is a reminder that self-worth is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Love that demands you abandon who you are is not love at all. True connection doesn't ask you to shrink, compromise your spirit, or trade your identity for temporary companionship. It uplifts, it protects, it sees you. Many of us, especially in the later chapters of life, believe that settling is better than being alone. But loneliness within a relationship is far more painful than solitude with self-respect. Henry's courage to choose himself, to walk away from something that dimmed his light, is a powerful lesson in reclaiming dignity. No matter your age, background, or past mistakes, you deserve a love that honors the full truth of who you are. The moment you begin to believe that is the moment everything changes, because the deepest, most loyal love begins within. If you find yourself feeling small, silenced, or unsure in a relationship, take a moment today to reflect. Ask yourself, am I living for love or losing myself in it? Start small. Revisit an old hobby. Call a friend who reminds you of who you truly are. Go for a walk without your phone. Stand in front of the mirror and look yourself in the eyes. You are not too old to change. You are not too far gone to begin again. Henry's story isn't just a tale, it's a template. A quiet revolution you can start today by choosing self-respect over approval. By setting one small boundary, by saying, "This matters to me." And if that scares you, let it. Growth is always uncomfortable, but so is staying stuck. You are enough, just as you are. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and share with your friends. Your support keeps these stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. And if today's story touched your heart, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Take care, stay well, and see you in the next story.